Deputy Tadier, the building of the Jersey's International Finance Centre. Can you shed a little bit of light on what's been going on of late?
Yeah, probably have a quick chronology of what's been happening recently. So in December last year, the scrutiny panel decided that they want to scrutinise the construction, the financial plan, etc. of the waterfront. The terms of reference will be on your blog. You'll put a link up. But just to look at them briefly, it's to consider whether the Esplanade Quarter continues to represent the best socio-economic value to States of Jersey. And then there are other terms of reference essentially which go into detail to talk about how they'll analyse that. We know that at the moment they're currently getting valuations done by Ernst & Young to look at the value of the site, whether the valuations, projections are all correct, whether they'll work out, and to see what the upsides and the downsides are, etc. That process is going on. It's expected to take roughly till the end of the month. That, of course, has been delayed. We found out in the States that the scrutiny panel have had difficulty getting the information they need, and basically have been given the runaround by the Minister and the...
What are you saying, that the Minister hasn't been giving the...
Well, we'll go into that in a moment when we talk about some of the machinations that have been going on, because this really has been, I'm not going to say a game of chess, it's been a lot dirtier than that, but there have been games being played which I believe have stopped scrutiny doing their job to buy more time for SOJDC to get the tenants they need, or rather, not even the tenants they need to fill the block, but to be able to secure the bank loan. We'll talk about that in a moment. So the scrutiny plan was going along, they were doing their job as scrutiny should be doing. And remember, Jersey doesn't have an upper or lower chamber, it doesn't have a party political system that's established. So the only forms of checks and balances that we really have in terms of the Parliament is the scrutiny function, and that's got to be allowed to do its job properly. Now, in the meantime, I lodged a proposition in April saying, let's make sure that before we sign any legally binding agreements, before SOJDC sign any legally binding agreements, before we start building work, let's make sure we hear back from scrutiny. That seems entirely sensible. We want to make sure we're on the right track, and if everything's hunky-dory, then we go ahead. It's been decided. If there are grave concerns or if there are some issues that need to be resolved, then let's look at that. We don't need to rush ahead with this. What's happened in the meantime is that there's obviously been a race to try and get tenants in there. So the development company referred to the scrutiny process and the scrutiny report and review as an irritant.
That's right.
Which I think is disrespectful. I think the company were foolish to make those kind of comments. They may not have liked this going on, but that's the democratic process. And they should have really stayed silent on that. And I think the Minister and SOJDC should have taken note of the fact that there was this process going on. They should have expedited it by giving the information that was required as quickly as possible, so that the review could have probably been done by now, or certainly, around about now. And that we could have avoided all this tension and conflict. It's not good for politics. We should have allowed the scrutiny to do its job properly. Now we're in a difficult position where the Minister's basically set broken promises, but we'll perhaps talk about that. Well, we can talk about it now.
Well,
if you like.
I think I was going to get onto, if you like, there has been, from both sides have been accused of spin and the rest of it. Can you deconstruct some of this spin, basically, from your perspective?
Yeah. So again, this week in the States, quite interesting, the Minister gave a statement about the development. They said they're pushing ahead with it. And it all goes back to the prior promises or the undertakings that were given, so political undertakings that were given by the previous Minister on more than one occasion in the States. Said,
the previous Treasury Minister.
Treasury Minister, we will not start any construction in there. We will not build until we have 200,000 square feet of tenancies signed up and contracts legally binding. That was the position. No one questioned that. That point was reiterated as recently as last year by the Treasury Minister under collective responsibility. None of the ministers said anything about that.
So that was policy.
That was policy. Now, the current Treasury Minister is saying, oh yeah, that's a mistake. Never came back to the States, and he's only said that it's a mistake after they've decided to break that policy and to go ahead with 16,500 square feet, which is much less. And the excuse we're being given, oh, that was a mistake, Senator Oser shouldn't have said that. Well, it wasn't a mistake. So basically we're being misled, in my opinion.
Well, I don't know, I think Alan McLean, didn't he say that was a policy under when Harcourt were going to be doing the...
But that's clearly not the case, because that was reiterated a long time after Harcourt were out of the picture. As I said last year by various questioners, no, that's the policy. You don't have to worry, because people were worried about the risk, you know. As Alan McLean, Senator McLean has said, no project is without risk. And the reassurance, if you like, for the states and for the public was that, don't worry, we'll make sure we've got the pre-lets in place. Pre-lets plural, not pre-let in the singular, and with the adequate space. So there's a lot of shenanigans going on there, a lot of spin. Spin's another word, some people call it lies, but of course in Parliament we're not allowed to talk about lying, because all states members are honourable and couldn't possibly ever tell anything that's other than the truth. In the outside world, of course, that's different. So what we said, first of all, it's a mistake. It's not a mistake. He's a fellow minister. He's still an assistant minister, works at economic development. He's conveniently out of the island. You know, I don't know what Senator Oser thinks about being blamed for something which was probably good.
Well, nobody knows what he thinks. He's been very quiet, hasn't he?
At the time, yeah, that's right. So I think that's the first part. It's not a mistake. You've changed your policy. You've done a U-turn. You've moved the goalposts. And quite rightly, people are angry about that. If you'd have told us this before the elections, then you know that would have been honest. But you haven't done that. Now he's tried to use distraction techniques. So, like, you know, the issues over here, people have got valid concerns. So he jingles something over here as classic distraction, and so he talks about, oh, don't worry, you know, no public money is being used for this. There's a lot of talk about public money being used. Which is of course true, you know, that they've got a bank loan, they've gone to a bank and got some money.
The State of Jersey Development Company.
State of Jersey Development Company borrowed money, but the assets against which they borrowed and the security is ultimately, you know, the taxpayer. So we own the land, it's public land, and ultimately, if there's any problem with that loan, if there's any problem with the financing of it, then the State of Jersey is the backstop. So, you know,
the taxpayer.
Yeah. So, and he's also used that to say, well, we don't need to get 200,000 square feet now because the bank's given us a loan and they're quite happy with the arrangement. Well, of course a bank's going to give a loan to an entity which is backed up by a government with a very good you know, loan rating, because they know that they're never going to default on that loan. So even if the waterfront is a spectacular failure, the bank's going to get their money anyway, because this is the government of Jersey that we're talking about. It's not yet bankrupt, they've still got some money. So, you know, that's the other issue.
Well, they're not financially bankrupt, but maybe bankrupt in other areas, but we won't go there.
And so, and the other thing is, we know that UBS were given, we hear, and it's yet to come out because, you know, of all this confidentiality, but one can imagine the Minister and SOJDC were desperate to get a tenant in there before scrutiny was allowed to finish its work, and before my proposition was debated, because I'm going to have to change my proposition now. I said, you know, don't start any building until scrutiny have done their report. So they, of course, have said, oh, well, we've got a tenant now, so we're going to start building, and we've already entered into legally binding contracts, so that makes yours invalid. You know, kind of school ground politics, if you like, but not ultimately good for the public. So that's where we are at the moment. He's also used other techniques by saying, you know, this is an either or. So if we sold the site, then we'd only get, you know, 20 million or whatever for that site. By doing this, we can get a rental income, but it's not an either or situation. Nobody's saying, you know, you should sell this site. We're saying, you know, let's look at this, see if it represents best value for the site. So it's a false dichotomy, if you like, that he's using there. And then lastly, I think the lowest of the low, it goes back to this reputational damage. When everything else fails, they say, oh, you're causing reputational damage by actually asking questions, by not letting us go ahead and build our nice tower. You know, but that's democracy, you know, and it's not causing reputational damage. This, you know, people have a right to question, they have a right, if necessary, to protest. The scrutiny function has a right to do its job, and it's actually the Minister, by not being forthright, and I would say not being honest, using spin, that actually damages the relationship with the public and the trust that we should be able to expect of our government. So that's certainly how I analyse what's been going on recently.
So you've been reported as calling for the Treasury Minister to consider his position, and you've raised concerns of the States of Jersey Development Company. Can you shed a little bit more light on that?
So let's be quite clear, the Treasurer is the shareholder representative for the States of Jersey Development Company, and so he is there to represent the state's interest, the State's Assembly's interest, and by extension the public's interest.
Yeah.
SOJDC basically are there to represent their own interest, to make profit and to extract value from the site. This is the kind of marketing talk, they use, extract the maximum value from the site. There are all sorts of questions to be asked around that, in terms of financial value versus socio-cultural value, but that's perhaps not for today. I don't believe that the Treasury Minister has been representing the shareholder interest, because that is the public interest, and he would have actually stood back and say, okay, there is a scrutiny process going on here, let's wait for that to come out. I had a public meeting at Communique in St Brelade's, which I asked for support for my proposition, which was simply to wait for the scrutiny report to come out. That was unanimously supported because it's a sensible thing to do. Now, I would have liked to have seen other states members, particularly constables, organising those kind of meetings, because that's what they should be doing. But we certainly know that the public moved in my neck of the woods, and it was a balanced meeting. The Minister came, SOJDC came. They were resolutely behind the scrutiny function, and I think that's replicated across the island. It seems to me we've now got a government, a minister, and his quango, which is out of control, and actually rather than representing the public interest, these quangos are basically telling ministers what to do. And even when we don't have quangos, we have questions about Condor this week in the States with Economic Development Minister. He sounded as if he was a chairman of Condor. He was basically defending, batting off all these valid questions that people were asking. And it's becoming more and more like that, these separations of powers. Now let's look at SOJDC for a minute and their chairman. So you've got the chairman of SOJDC, who is an elected member in the City of London government. He's on the Policy and Resources Committee out there. He's the chairman of the States of Jersey Development Committee. He's the one who said that scrutiny was an irritant. So I think he's crossed the political line there. He's also the chairman of the Channel Island Competition and Regulatory Authority, authorities, which are supposed to regulate things like SOJDC, because they're going to be in competition with the private sector in terms of office space. So whether or not he'll at some point have to stand down from that. But these are the kind of crazy things that go on in Jersey. Another crazy thing that we found out this week, I say crazy, I think I was absolutely outraged when I heard this coming out in Question Time, and that's why Question Time is so important, is that we were told that the scrutiny panel was asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Nothing wrong with that, they already exist, but this was a special non-disclosure agreement which would make them personally liable for any leakage of the documents or any of the sensitive material, which is unprecedented to ask parliamentarians to become personally liable for doing a job that they're elected to do. And thankfully, the scrutiny panel, and I think with advice from the GREF, said, this would set a very bad precedent. And of course that had a delay, so all the time going back and forward. We've only found out that on Monday or Tuesday in the States, because of a question they were asking, the minister finally was willing to hand over some information. Now, and this is after he's already gone ahead and signed legally binding contracts. So you can see all the machinations, the shenanigans that have been going on in the States. And this now has become more than simply about what kind of buildings we're putting up at the waterfront. This is about the democratic process not doing its job, breaking down in Jersey. And I hope that people of all shades of politics or none will actually realise that that's not acceptable. We need to do something. You need to claim back your government and your assembly for the people of Jersey.
Well, we want them to represent us and not the quangos and the businesses, obviously. So if the Treasury Minister, the current Treasury Minister, doesn't consider his position, are you going to call for a vote of no confidence?
I mean, that's certainly on the cards. I mean, I think it merits that. I do, and you know, there are questions to ask about whether the vote of no confidence should be in the development company and the minister, or both of them.
Or the council of ministers.
Could be the council of ministers. The problem with that is, of course, we know it's not going to succeed. The States is full of yes men and women who increasingly, many of them don't speak. They would just loyally press the button for the council of ministers, and that's unfortunate. You know, we're supposed to have a system of independent politics with a party that I belong to, but increasingly we're seeing party politics but without the democracy. Which is not healthy, and I don't think anyone in Jersey signed up to that. You know.
To wrap up on Deputy, there's a public protest against this development this Sunday. Can you just tell us a little bit about that before we finish?
That's right. So, protest's been organised not by myself, but I'll be going down. I think it's important to actually, for those who've got concerns about the development, but also concerns about the process. I think they go down Sunday afternoon, 2:30, and show some support for that. There's supposed to be, I think, a ring of arms around the site, but
at the waterfront.
At the waterfront, whatever happens, I think it's important that people go down and say, you know, this is our land, and we want to reclaim our government. We want you to start listening, to stop the spin, to stop the arrogance and saying you always know best, and to actually say maybe there is an alternative way forward.
Well, just quickly, so I suppose what you're saying is there, look, you, even if you are for or against the actual building itself, is you say, look, you know, we want to claim our government back. We want you to represent. We want our government to represent us and not the Quangos.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it's all about the process. You know, that whatever the outcome for the waterfront, you know, something will be built there, no doubt, and I hope that whatever is built as a success, and that it's diverse, you know, and that people use it not just for officers, but you know, it becomes a cultural hub. But I think that the process is so key to that. If we can't ask questions and have answers and be given straight answers, then you know, we might as well just all go home. We might as well just have unelected people running the island, and then you know, that's not the kind of island I want to be living in.
So if you care about democracy, be down there, waterfront, Sunday 2:30.
Yeah.